New York's classic rock, Q1043.
And it is our pleasure and our privilege to welcome Professor Brian Cox, CBE, that's Commander of the British Empire, is it not?
Yes,
CBE,
so due deference.
Professor of Particle Physics at the University of Manchester, and a Fellow of the Royal Society. Now, we don't often have physicists visit with us early in the morning, but in this particular case, we thought you would be interested in meeting him. And if you're lucky, you might even still be able to buy tickets to his appearance at the Beacon Theater next Tuesday. Tickets are almost sold out. There are just a few left. And Professor Cox is touring the world, and he's selling out theaters all over the globe. And Shelley and I often mention on the air, we often talk about the two smartest people that we've ever met who have been guests here in the studio. And I guess now we're going to have to add a third to that pantheon. But what's really interesting is that one of them is Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is a friend of yours. But now two of the three will be British guys named Brian who are musicians. Because
Brian May.
Do you know him? Do you know him?
Dr. Brian May has
Brian, yeah.
also been a frequent visitor of ours.
I got to hear the conversations you have with Brian May. Would we understand them, or are you talking music?
Oh, no, we talk about astronomy. I try to steer it onto music because I want to know all the Queen stories, but he now wants to talk about astronomy all the time. I mean, that's what he is. You know, the fact that he went back and finished his thesis after leaving early to be in Queen for, I don't know what it was, 30 years, is remarkable.
And you have your roots in music, right? You were a musician before you became a rocket scientist. I know it's not a rocket scientist, but that's what we say.
Yeah, I joined a band. I was lucky. When I was 18, Darren Wharton, who was a keyboard player from Thin Lizzy, moved in very close to where I lived, near Manchester. And when Lizzy split up, just in the sort of mid-80s, he formed a band. And he remembered that there was this kid. I'd give him a demo tape. It's one of those stories. My dad had seen him in the pub. There's a guy from Thin Lizzy in the pub. So I was 15, and I gave this demo tape, which was just, no good at all. But he remembered there was a keyboard player from up the road. And then he got in touch, and he said, I need a keyboard player. Do you want to come and audition? And it was because I could program things, because I'm geeky. So I could set up all the, the electronic keyboards of the time. Which were
but
difficult.
The fact of the matter is the bands that you were in Britain were popular in Britain.
Yeah. Dare, that band was called Dare. And we recorded both albums here in the US, in LA, actually. I'd never been out of the country. Huh. And we recorded part of it at Joni Mitchell's house with, with a bass player called Larry Klein, who's a great bass player and still a producer now. And Mike Shipley, who'd done, actually, Night at the Opera. I think he was the engineer on Night at the Opera, going back to Queen, and then did some Def Leppard stuff. So remarkable.
But then you pursued a career as an academic.
Yeah, I decided that music was. I did it for about 5 years, and then thought, actually, I want to go back and do astronomy, which I'd always wanted to do.
Now, I'm going to have to phrase this question in the only way that I can, because attempting to read about certain subjects, quite frankly, makes me feel dumb as a rock. I believe myself to be reasonably literate. I have an understanding of written and spoken English language, yet A Brief History of Time, for instance. I've read that book cover to cover 3 times, and I'm being completely truthful with you. I don't understand what I read. Einstein's Universe, which was written, I would say, for an audience that was even less informed about physics than the Stephen Hawking book. I didn't understand that one either.
Yeah.
I would read a paragraph, words that I understood put into questions or sentences that you would ordinarily be able to discern the meaning of, and I would read a paragraph and I would stop and I would go, what? Huh?
Well, Stephen,
I'm just talking about physics. How can a normal person wrap their mind around physics and cosmology and the quantum world and quarks and string theory and all that and not have their brain explode. And your job is to go out onto the stage and explain everything so that we can understand it.
Well, but also part of it is coming to terms with the fact that nature does make your brain explode. I mean, I start the show by just talking about the size and scale of the universe that we can see. So we're in the Milky Way galaxy, 400 billion stars. I mean, immediately, 400 billion suns. Most of them are planets, so over 1 trillion planets. Our galaxy is one of 2 trillion galaxies in the patch of the universe we can see. We think the universe extends way beyond that, might be infinite. And our universe itself, as I get to in the second half of the show, might be one bubble universe in an infinite sea of universes. So, but the point is that nobody, I remind the audience, nobody, professional or otherwise, understands what those sentences mean. No one has a feeling for that. And part of the joy, I think, of astronomy and cosmology is that it challenges you to think about what it means to be human, really, what it means to be these little ants on this mote of dust around one star amongst 400 billion in one galaxy amongst 2 trillion. There is actually a question, what am I to make of that? And physicists can't answer that. I can tell you the numbers, but I think what we make of it is a personal choice.
Did I read right that you don't believe there is life outside of Earth?
No, I think, and again, we talk about this in the show, I wouldn't be surprised if we find microbes on Mars. I mean, I was just at JPL actually a few months ago, in Pasadena. They're operating a rover on the surface now, which is what's called a sample return mission, which is going to take samples from Mars. They're going to fly them back to Earth. And the reason we're doing that is to look for microbes, or sign that there was life. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was life on Mars 3.5 billion years ago, when we know there were rivers and oceans and everything you need. But if you ask the question, how many complex living things are there out there? If you think about what we are,
right.
Everyone listening now, we're collections of atoms.
That think. I know. You made
think.
that statement you made. We're a collection of atoms that think.
It's an astonishing thing. And it took the best part of 4 billion years to get to that point on Earth. And that's a long time, even in physics terms, a third of the age of the universe. So I think we might be one of the very few places where that's happened. So not microbes, but an actual civilization.
Okay, since you brought up atoms, okay, I have a question for you. This is a weird question. I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can here.
No, weird's good.
Okay.
I said nature's weird.
Now, not all science consists of things that are actually proven.
Yeah.
Because you can't prove everything. Some scientific knowledge is based on faith. It's based on I surmise this is probably true because this wouldn't work if this wasn't true. But I read a book by Francis Collins. Now, it was published, I would say, a decade or so ago, so things may have changed in the interim. But Francis Collins said that nobody has ever proven that the electron exists. No one has ever observed an electron. No one has been able to prove there's such a thing as an electron. Most scientists believe in electrons and believe that there are such things as electrons, because if there weren't electrons, then certain other processes wouldn't seem to be possible. But he also said there are some scientists who say, no, there's no such thing as an electron. That's BS. And it just blows me away.
Well, I think you're right to say we don't really know what an electron is at a fundamental level. And this is the point about science. There's one of my great heroes, Richard Feynman, who wrote, if you can go online, there's an essay he wrote in 1955 called The Value of Science, and you can just go and type it in, you can get it. It's wonderful. And in there, he defines science as a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance. Right. So what it is, science, is the best we can do at any one time. So we're trying to understand with the electron, it was 1897 when it's credited as being discovered. But we're just trying to understand the way that light came off atoms and try to understand what we saw when we looked at the sun and split the light up into a rainbow, things like that. And so you make models. And what is the reason that is successful, and the reason that science is the thing on which our civilization is based, whether we notice it or like it or not, is because it's the best way of acquiring reliable knowledge about the world. It's reliable knowledge. It works, as you said. If we assume there are things called electrons, even though we don't really know what they are or how big they are, or you're right, you can carry on digging down, and I'm sure we will find a deeper theory. In fact, I was going to say that you mentioned Stephen Hawking. So when he wrote A Brief History of Time, it was just after he'd done some of the most original important work on black holes. And he didn't understand what he'd done. He discovered something called Hawking radiation. He thought that, until quite late in life actually, he thought that black holes destroy information about the universe. So if you throw a book into a black hole and the black hole evaporates away, which is what he showed they do remarkably, then he thought nothing came out. And then just in the last few years, he changed his mind and said, no, actually, the new research has come out. I now think information comes out. But I talk about this in the show. It's 2020, 2021 papers that are beginning to suggest how the information comes out. And the reason I say all that is because those theories are beginning to suggest that even space and time, so you talk about electrons, even space and time are built of something else. That's what we're beginning to think now. So, time, the thing that ticks on your watch, and space, the room that you're sitting in now, we're beginning to think that there are somehow atoms or building blocks of those things that come out of something deeper.
Professor Brian Cox is with us. We'll get into the Beacon Theater show in just a moment. Shelley, you have another question?
Okay, this is the big one, Brian. Is there any scientific evidence of life after death?
No.
That was it. No. No, we're just gone. That's it. There's nothing. There's nothing.
Well, it's the right question.
He's a physicist. He's not a metaphysicist.
No. It's really important not to make things up. So you said, is there any evidence? That's a good question. The answer is no, not that I'm aware of. But then, whether that means there's more about the universe, that there is more about the universe than I understand.
Okay.
So
here's a question.
Undoubtedly.
What
here's
a
a
bummer.
question that will be easier. Is it true that an individual particle can be in more than one place at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Did you hear that, Shelley?
Yes.
Yes. Does that make sense to your brain?
No.
It's because you talked about electrons, and we said, we don't really know what they are. So the description of an electron is if you put it in the room, if you're sat in a room now and
Right.
you're enclosed in a room and you put the electron in the room, then the actual description of it is that it fills the room. And then I'm going to say this scientific phrase, which when you hear it, you understand that scientists are waving their hands around. And I'll say, in some sense, it fills the room. And scientists always say, in some sense.
Okay,
but they don't really know
but a
what that means.
But a particle is a physical object. A particle is physical, and it can be in more than one place simultaneously.
Yeah, it's because the word particle suggests grain of sand, doesn't it? Or it's a little thing that's made of something. And the real description, the deepest description we have of things like electrons are what's called fields, which are things that fill a lot of space. So there's a thing called quantum field theory, which is the best description we have of things like electrons. And so they're extended things that spread out and fill the space that they're in. And as I said, even now, the work on black holes, and I know you said about the show, it's in the show, this, so it's relevant. Because I said earlier, you said very kindly, we'll plug your show now. And I said, I'm really no good at plugging shows because I start talking about something else.
Yeah, but,
so everyone who's
but
listening,
in your show, you talk about
show.
the black holes and you talk about the difference in perception of time.
Yeah, well, that's relativity. So you go back to 1905, Einstein's first theory, E equals mc squared, comes from that theory. And even in there, we find that time passes at different rates for different people. And it's a really simple picture, actually. So if I say to you, we're going to D.C. now, our first show is tomorrow in Washington. And so we're going to go from New York to Washington. And the distance between New York and Washington depends on which route you take, right? Which is kind of an obvious thing to say.
Right.
What Einstein discovered is there's such a thing called space-time, which is kind of it's often described as the fabric of the universe. Brian Greene had a great book called The Fabric of the Universe. And the thing you measure on your watch is the distance you travel between events, so between things that happen in space-time. So if you take a different route, then you travel a different distance between those things that happen. And so your watch measures a different time. And that's it. So it's actually quite a simple idea. But it really does mean that if we left this studio now and I meet you in 1 year's time and we get back together and we come back on the show and chat again, if we had really very precise watches, then we'd find that we'd aged at different rates because we took different routes through the universe to those two things from today.
You're making my
today's
head
years
hurt.
But the fact is, audiences around the globe have not only enjoyed Professor Cox's shows, but have been illuminated by them and have been spurred onto a desire to discover more and more about the universe that we inhabit. Reviews of your shows are just absolutely amazing, and we don't have time to get into it all. But I mean, my goodness, you're such a prolific writer. You've sold millions and millions of books. You've got these very successful television shows on the BBC. Of course, because I'm a radio guy, I love the fact that you have a radio show with your friend who's sitting right next to you.
Yeah, Robin, it's great. Fortunately, he doesn't have a microphone because he's a stand-up comedian. If he had a microphone, I wouldn't get a word in.
But he's pointing out everything he said wrong, that's for sure. If you come to the show, that's when I
But he's part of your stage performance and also conducts a Q&A with the audience. But you have all of these amazing visual effects to illustrate what it is that you're saying about the cosmos, and it's an immersive experience that I understand is quite incredible.
It's designed for arenas because in the UK people know who I am, right? So I can do these 15,000 seat things. So we use big LED screens and we put as much as we can into the theatres here in the US. And but they're 100 feet wide, and the graphics have been made for those screens. And also we show images from the Hubble Space Telescope and the surface of Mars, because those images are so detailed and beautiful that you can put them on a screen 100 feet wide in an arena. And I've had astronomers come who were involved in those missions who say, I've never seen it. You see it on a little laptop screen, a little computer screen, and then you see it across Wembley Arena, and it's a very different feeling. So yeah, it's a show that was built for 15,000 people, and then so when you see it in a smaller theatre, my promoters outside, you'd never be able to spend that amount of money on graphics if we were doing small theatres everywhere in the world. So the US audience gets the benefit of the fact that the UK audience have paid for it.
And it's the Beacon, the Beacon Theatre. It's next Tuesday, April 26th, 8 p.m. There are still some tickets left, not many. There are some left. So if you want to see the show, which is Horizons, a 21st Century Space Odyssey.
Yep. We dive into a black hole. We see images of black holes, graphics of black holes. We go to the end of time. We talk about multiple universes. I made an 8-minute version of 2001 at the start of it, basically, which was quite ambitious.
My boss
Wow.
would love to have the multiple universes conversation with you.
Oh God, yes.
And of course you can follow him at Prof. Brian Cox on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah, that differentiates me from the actor, who does get confused with me occasionally, he says. Really? In Succession. Yeah. We actually went out for dinner once together in London, and he walked into the restaurant and said, I have a table for Brian Cox, and they took him to the table. And then I walked in afterwards and said, I have a table for Brian Cox. And they looked very panicked because they thought they'd made a huge mistake. They couldn't work out which one had booked it.
That's like Jim Kerr and Jim Care of Simple Minds.
Yeah.
Spelled the same, but different
we've ruined
people.
Google for one another.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that. We've spent some time together as well. Professor Cox, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today. Remember, the Beacon Theatre, it's Tuesday. This sounds absolutely fascinating. Some tickets still available, but you'll have to act fast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.